Hello everyone and welcome to Medford Anywhere Learning TV. We're glad you're tuned in. We want to give a shout out to our friends at Southern Oregon PBS, KTVL, KDRV, and the Dove Network. Thank you for hosting us on your station. In the Medford School District, we have one shared vision, and that we believe that all are learning, and learning is for all. And what better place to do that than right here on Medford Anywhere Learning TV.
Hi, my name is Mrs. Wolf, and today we're going to learn about poetry, reading poetry, writing poetry, and writing about poetry. What do you think of when you hear the word poetry? Some of you may have said that you really love poetry, and some of you may have thought about Shakespeare, who admittedly is a tough author to understand. Some of you may have thought about rhyme or meter or rhythm, and how that really is either hard to read or hard to write. Poetry is really important. In fact, Joy Harjo, our U.S. Poet Laureate, said, "Without poetry, we lose our way." First, we're going to talk about some vocabulary that goes along with reading and writing about poetry. First is literary devices, specific language techniques that writers use in order to get their message across. The next is imagery. This is language that appeals to the five senses to help writers describe and give their readers a sense of what they want to express. The next is connotation. These are the emotional associations we have with words. One way that you can think about connotation is by thinking about the word home. Often we talk about home in terms of comfort or family or warmth, as opposed to house, a place where we live. So that's one way that you can think about connotation. The next vocabulary word that we have is metaphor. This is the comparison of two unlike things. For example, my brother is a bear when he's hungry. The next vocabulary word we have is simile. This is the comparison of two unlike things using like or as. For example, she shines like the sun. And lastly, alliteration. This is the repetition of initial consonant sounds, like the children's rhyme, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. First, I'd like to talk to you about reading poetry. I've chosen two poets from the beginning of the 20th century. Both of them are American writers. The first is The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. William Carlos Williams was a poet from the early 20th century. He's an American poet and also a doctor. And this is one of his most famous poems. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. That is such a simple poem, and yet so profound. He focuses in on some imagery there. That's why he's called an imagist. The red wheelbarrow, that it is glazed with rainwater, and that it is right beside the white chickens. We're not sure what so much depends upon this red wheelbarrow that's covered in rainwater with the white chickens next to it, but we can appreciate it for the imagery that he shares with us. The next poem I'd like to share with you is Fog by Carl Sandburg. Carl Sandburg is another American poet from the 20th century, and here is one of his poems. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city, on silent haunches, and then moves on. Carl Sandburg is using a metaphor here, comparing the fog to a cat. And if you have a cat, you know that cats can creep in on cat feet very silently, just like fog. And so by using this comparison, Carl Sandburg is not only giving us an image of what the fog looks like, but we can go beyond the literal understanding of the text and of the words to understand fog like an animal that is creeping in and looking at the harbor and the city. One thing I'd like to share with you is how you can write poetry. Now, a lot of you may be intimidated when you think of writing poetry. You're not sure how to do that. But you have to remember that just like the poems that we just read, which were about everyday objects, you can write about everyday objects too. You also don't have to write with rhyme or meter. So I'd encourage you to gather some everyday objects, some things lying around your house that you want to write about, and I'm going to show you how you can easily write some poetry. I have an orange here, I have some paper, and I have a pen. And I could write about all three of these, but I'm going to choose to write about the orange. So first, I'm just going to write that on my paper here. And then I'm going to brainstorm some things about the orange, some imagery, some language that appeals to my five senses. So first I notice that it is cold. And it is also orange. It's kind of smooth. It has small ridges. I also noticed that it is round, that it is a globe. Now, I'm not going to peel this for you, but if I were to, I could eat the orange and maybe describe that. It may seem kind of silly, but I can listen to the orange, and the orange is not saying anything to me, so it is silent. So I'm going to look at these words and see what I can come up with. One thing that my orange does is that it sits on a counter. So I'm going to start, my title is going to be, I think I'm going to start it with just titling it an orange. Kind of like what William Carlos Williams and Carl Sandburg did with their poems. They just titled it with the object, the name of the object itself. So I think about my orange and where it usually is, and it usually is on my counter. So the orange, I'm going to start off with that, sits on my counter. And I can put end punctuation here, or I cannot. If you notice in William Carlos Williams' poem and Carl Sandburg's poem, they do not put punctuation at the end of each line. So I think I'm just going to leave it without punctuation. And then I look at my list, and I like the word smooth and silent. I'm a fan of alliteration personally. And this orange just seems very calm to me. So I'm going to add to my brainstorm a word many of you may be familiar with, serene, which also starts with S. And I'm going to add that to my poem. So I have here smooth. And in order to highlight those words, I'm just going to list them vertically here. Silent, serene. And I like the idea of not having any punctuation in there. So I'm going to leave it like that. That's my poem. Pretty simple. Another thing that I can do is compare my orange to something. Use a metaphor or a simile. So here I can think of some ideas like my orange is like the sun, ? Or I can add in a metaphor here. The sun is an orange. I kind of like that one. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to cross this off. Okay, I'm going to edit right here for you. It does not have to be perfect the first time. Just like any other type of writing, you are going to go through drafts of your poetry, and that is okay. The sun is an orange. And when I think of oranges, sometimes I think of them hanging on an orange tree. So if I have my metaphor, the sun is an orange, I'm going to put on here hanging. And where does the sun hang? In the sky. Okay. And maybe I try to reach for that orange, just like or the sun, excuse me. Just like I want to pick an orange and maybe it's too high for me, I'm going to try and pick the sun here. I reach up to pick it. It is out of reach. Out of my reach. And I'm going to put a period there. And then maybe I'll end with some of the words that I had in my first poem. Serene. It is serene and untouched. So I'm going to read my poem here. The sun is an orange hanging in the sky. I reach up to pick it. It is out of my reach. It is serene and untouched. Maybe I read that and I think, maybe I don't like repeating the word reach here. So I am going to cross that out. It is out of my reach. Maybe it is too high for me. So editing poetry can get pretty messy here. It is serene and untouched. Maybe I'm going to switch these. So I'm just going to circle these and switch them. So those are some ways that you can write about poetry, looking for imagery, looking for metaphor and simile. Next, I'd like to share with you how you can write about poetry. How can you understand the meaning of a poem? I have a few steps that you can follow. The first is to read it once to get the gist and to circle any words that you don't understand. The second is to read through and then summarize what is literally happening in the poem. And then third, highlight any figurative language or literary devices that you see in that poem. So I'd like to share with you a poem called Harlem by Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was a writer at the beginning of the 20th century who lived in Harlem in New York City. And he was part of a movement called the Harlem Renaissance, where many people were exploring new ways to write music, to write literature and poetry, and to make art. So here is his poem, Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? That's our first reading to get the gist. Now I'm going to go back through and summarize what I've learned and also circle words that I don't understand. I would circle a dream deferred. What does deferred mean is a question that I would have. Or fester, like a sore. What does fester mean? We're going to come back to that. So if I look through this poem, I can summarize our second step, what is literally happening in the poem to help me understand what is going on. So I read what happens to a dream. And maybe I don't know what deferred means yet because I'm going to look that up in the dictionary. But a dream could be a dream that I have at night, or maybe it's a dream like a goal or an aspiration. So I'm going to put that in my mind and summarize that there. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? I know that grapes, when they dry up, are raisins, so I can understand that part. I'm not sure about fester yet, and we're going to get there. But a sore, is it a wound or an injury? That would be a question that I have. Does it stink like rotten meat? I know that when I have rotten meat, it stinks and I want to throw it away. So I understand that part. Or crust and sugar over, like a syrupy sweet. Something that is sugary may crust over when it gets old or deformed. So that's what that sounds like to me. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Like when you have a heavy load in your backpack and it just sags on your back. And then does it explode? I'm not sure about that part. So I'm going to come back to that. So that's our second reading. I have just gone through and identified words that I wasn't sure about. And I also summarized what I understood of the poem. The important thing here is that I don't understand the entire poem, but I am summarizing the parts that I do understand so that I can move forward. Next, the last step is to highlight the literary devices that I see in the poem. So the first line, what happens to a dream deferred? And I looked that up in the dictionary, and I learned that deferred means to put off or postpone to a later time. So what happens to a dream put off or postponed to a later time is his first question. Notice also that I have highlighted that, and I can see that there is some alliteration. A dream deferred. He is repeating the initial consonant sounds D there. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Now I notice that it is referring to dream deferred. So I've highlighted that in the same color. So he's comparing a dream that is postponed to a raisin that is drying up in the sun. And he uses like or as, so it is a simile. So I'm going to annotate that. Or fester like a sore and then run. And I said we'd come back to fester. And fester means to become inflamed and generate pus. So that's kind of gross. It's a wound that is pussing and running and is inflamed. So he's using simile again here as well. And then, does it stink like rotten meat? Again, comparing a dream deferred to rotten meat. He's using a simile here. Langston Hughes really likes similes in this poem. Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet. Again, a simile. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. And you guessed it, it's a simile. And then lastly, or does it explode? And hold on. He has not used a simile here. He is comparing a dream deferred to something that explodes. And so we don't know what that thing is. Maybe it's something that explodes on its own, like vinegar and baking soda. Or maybe it's something that explodes because it's so exciting. Or maybe, so I have some questions there about that. But I know that he's comparing a dream deferred to something that explodes without using like or as. So I'm going to put metaphor there. So I've gone through all of those steps, and I am still not sure about the meaning of the poem. So I'm going to go through a few other questions to help me and you understand what this poem means. So how do we determine the meaning of a poem? The first question you can ask yourself is, what does the poet refer to or repeat throughout the poem? So here we can see that he repeats a dream deferred, or at least refers to it over and over and over again. So that gives us a clue that that's an important part of this poem. 2, what comparisons does the poet make? Metaphors and similes. Well, we can see that Langston Hughes uses a ton of metaphors and similes here in this poem. And so by comparing over and over and over again the dream deferred to different things, he is telling us something important there about a dream deferred. 3, what is the poet emphasizing through the literary devices they have chosen? So because he continues to refer to a dream deferred and uses similes and a metaphor to refer to those, we can see that that is really important, but also I want to start to list those similes. It dries up like a raisin in the sun. It's a sore that festers and runs. It's rotten meat. It's a deformed piece of candy. It's a sagging load, and then it explodes. When we think back to our vocabulary words, connotation is where we have those emotional meanings associated with words. And I look at this list and I see that all of these are negative, that these words have negative connotations. And so a dream deferred, that is a dream that is put off or postponed, has negative consequences. Okay, so I can hold on to that as the meaning of this poem. That last question, what is the historical background of a poem, is really important in this case. And I had to do some research to understand the historical background of Harlem. Langston Hughes was writing during the early 20th century when many African Americans were experiencing discrimination. There was a lot of segregation in the United States, in the North as well as the South. And so we can infer or guess that this poem really is referring to dreams that were deferred by African Americans, and either through their own choices or the choices of others. So after we've asked ourselves those questions, then we can determine some meaning. And I can guess here that the meaning is that the dream that is deferred has negative consequences and may alter that dream forever. So you may be asking, how do I write an analysis of poetry? First, don't panic. Second, you need to start with a claim about the message of the poem. The third step is to include some evidence from the poem. And the fourth step is to write commentary about how your evidence supports your claim. Here are some sentence starters that can help you get started. First, you need to write a claim. And here is a sentence frame that you could use. In the poem, uses in order to express the idea that We're going to fill in those blanks with the poem's title, the poet's name, the literary device or devices that you're going to focus on, and the meaning of the poem. So here's our example. In the poem Harlem, Langston Hughes uses similes in order to express the idea that dreams that are put off or postponed disintegrate and fall apart before they can be realized. So that is our claim. Next, we need to find some evidence that's going to support that claim. And because I chose similes, I need to find a simile from the poem to include there. So our next step is to include evidence. Here's our sentence frame. For example, he or she utilizes, which is a sophisticated word for uses, when he or she writes And we want to fill in the blanks with the device that we're using and a quote from the poem. So here's an example from our poem, Harlem. For example, he utilizes simile when he writes, "Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?" Great, so now we have our claim and our evidence, but now we need to write some commentary to connect the two. When the author, he is or she is illustrating or emphasizing, And we want to fill in the blanks with a reference to the evidence and then also the meaning of the poem. And we're not going to go back to the same words that we used in the claim because that would be repetitive. So we need to find a different way to express that. So here's our example from our poem. When the author compares a postponed dream to a dried up raisin, he is illustrating how putting off dreams can change them forever. So there you have it. There's our commentary. And voila, put it all together and you have an analysis. Here is our claim, our evidence, and our commentary. You could add in more evidence and commentary and then a concluding sentence to make this a more robust paragraph. That's all I have for you folks. Thank you for watching Medford Anywhere Learning TV.
Thanks for tuning in to Medford Anywhere Learning TV. Medford School District is a place where all are learning, and learning is for all.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I am an innovative educator. I will continue to ask what is best for learners. With this empathetic approach, I will create and design learning experiences.
I'm an educator. I'm an innovator.
I believe that my abilities, intelligence, and talents can be developed, leading to the creation of new and better ideas.
I recognize that there are obstacles in education, but as an innovator, I will focus on what is possible today to make way for even richer possibilities for tomorrow.
Soy una educadora, soy una innovadora.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I will utilize the tools that are available to me today, and I will continue to search for new and better ways to grow, develop, and share my thinking while creating and connecting my learning.
I focus not only on where I can improve, but where I am strong and what I can do to help develop those strengths in myself and others.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I build upon what I know, but I do not limit myself for my students. I embrace knowledge, and I'm continuously asking questions that allow my students and myself to move forward.
I'm an educator. I'm an innovator.
I question thinking, challenge ideas, and do not accept this is the way we've always done it as an acceptable answer for my students or for myself.
I'm an educator. I'm an innovator.
I model learning and leadership I seek in others. I take risks, try new things, develop and explore new opportunities. I ask others to take risks in their learning, and I openly model that I'm willing to do the same.
I believe that working in isolation is the enemy of innovation. By working with others, I will create learning opportunities for others and myself.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I connect with others both locally and globally to tap into ideas from all people and places. I will use these ideas along with my professional judgment to adapt to the needs of the learners in my community.
I believe in my voice and experiences and the voice and experiences of others, because that's what moves education forward.
I'm an educator. I'm an innovator.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I share because the learning I create and the experiences I have help others. I share to push my own thinking and to impact learners both young and old all over the world.
I listen and learn from different perspectives because I know we are much better together than we could ever be alone. I can learn from anyone at any situation. I actively reflect on my learning because I know looking back is critical to moving forward.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
I am an educator. I am an innovator.
A principal makes sure everyone is safe and we don't run into any problems like, oh, what if we don't have enough money for all the field trips we're having? The principal always puts the big pictures for assemblies on the screen.
Bring teachers to meetings to help them learn stuff.
Make sure that the students are on task and following the rules. Whenever somebody comes to the office, they both solve their problems together and make a solution for every problem that they do.
Have you ever had to go to the office and talk to the principal?
Yes.
What's that like?
I actually went there today. She would find out some fundraisers for us to find enough money, and so our school doesn't have any problems.
If there wasn't a principal, it would probably be total chaos and the teachers would be arguing all the time. This whole entire school would be like so crazy that there would be people getting so crazy that they would be like throwing food all over the walls, pushing bookshelves down, breaking stuff.
Thank you for making the school the most wonderfulest place. Thank you for running this school. I really like it. Thank you for being great representative for the students and for other people around the world.